trace our roots back. We go back to 1895. My great-grandfather, who you can sort of see in this picture right here, this fellow right there, that's my great-grandfather. And he used to be the manager of the Standard Wagon Company in Albany, and then the automobile put him out of business. So as a result, the poor fellow had to do something else for a living, so he decided he'd do life insurance, figuring as long as people are alive, they'll need life insurance. So he started to sell life insurance, and then somewhere after the turn of the century, my grandfather came into the business with him, and he wanted to insure those newfangled automobiles. So he insured automobiles. And then somewhere around 1905 or so, we insured our very first homeless shelter back in 1905. That was that was the Schenectady City Mission at the time. And then my grandfather served on their board of directors for 40 years. And then after he retired off the board, then my dad served for another 40 years after him. And after my dad retired, then I served on the board. How far back can we trace the principle of insurance? Well, before the industry of insurance, there was the principle of suretyship, which is closely aligned to insurance. Suretyship is the principle of somebody standing in the stead of another. And the one who's standing in the stead has the capacity to stand for the other. Such as if you wanted to do a municipal job and you didn't have a huge amount of money, the municipality would require that you have a bond. A bond is a form of suretyship. In essence, the bonding company would put up its good credit, its financial resources, as a guarantor to the fact that you would complete the job properly. If you didn't do the job properly, then they would pay out what's called the penalty, and that's called a suretyship. And we can trace that even back to biblical times. We find the same principle identified in the Bible, whereby we learn that Jesus is our surety, because he steps into our stead, because he was the perfect sacrifice. We are not. So our death does not pay for our sin, but his death did. So if you look it up in the scripture, you'll find that Jesus is referred to as our surety. It's the same principle. Business of insurance as a formalized industry like we sort of know it now goes back to the early 1600s. Britain had a problem that they had congregated in wooden buildings in downtown London, for the most part, and whenever there were fires, they would wipe out entire blocks, and there'd be massive amounts of damage. So a very enterprising dentist created a system whereby he would come to you before the fire and he'd say, if you would like, we will put a plate on your building called a fire mark, and if your building catches fire, then we will rebuild it for you for free. Now you just pay us a small fee every year, and we'll take care of that arrangement for you. He then figured if he could then actually prevent the fire from happening, he could then reduce the amount of cost that he had to incur in order to rebuild those buildings. So he invented his own fire brigades. And what would happen is when the fire bell went off, saying that a certain part of London was on fire, he would then take his group, his fire brigade out, and if they found the fire mark in your building, they'd put the fire out. Otherwise, they'd just watch it burn. How did I personally get involved in doing missions? Again, when my dad retired, he impressed upon me that there were certain programs that were more important than others, and he always impressed upon me the importance of ministry. So I've always had my heart with the homeless shelters and the gospel rescue missions. I think the first time that I really started to have a strong interest in making it into a program instead of just writing a mission here or there was after 9/11. There was a problem with getting insurance in downtown Manhattan, and the oldest homeless shelter in the United States is in downtown Manhattan. So after 9/11, the New York City Rescue Mission lost their insurance company and they lost their insurance broker. So they were without any insurance. And so the executive director called the executive director of another client of ours who runs a homeless shelter and asked what to do. And that man directed him to us. And I was able to go back to the insurance company and ask them to underwrite that particular mission, and they said no because of its proximity to Ground Zero. And I reminded them that they insured other homeless shelters and that these people all talk to one another, and that it would really be best if they did try to really help this mission. And recognized that there was sort of a veiled threat in that. They came back and not only underwrote the mission, but they gave us a very fine price for the value that we were able to obtain. And the executive director was very pleased with that. Soon thereafter, there was another mission that had a similar problem down in New Jersey. They had had a very bad loss, and the insurance company canceled them also, which insurance companies tend to do if there are bad losses. And they approached me because they were friends with the other homeless shelter's executive director, and was directed to call Brian Merriam, and I was blessed to be able to call the insurance company underwriter and have a similar discussion and ask them if they would accommodate it, and they said they would not. I reminded them of the other missions that we wrote with that insurance company, and they then changed their tune, and they came back and not only gave a binder for us, but they came in at a lower premium than the mission had been paying before. So in that situation, then we had a couple really good success stories, and so at that point in time I tried to elevate the idea of going to the association itself and saying, if we could have this kind of success with just a couple missions, think of how much more success we might have if we were to approach the entire association as a whole. The endorsement came about. Well, we recognized that if we could band together the various homeless shelters and approach an insurance company predominantly, that they would be inclined to give us better pricing, better coverage, and more liberal underwriting. And that's really important with homeless shelters, because a lot of homeless shelters have nuances that make them difficult to underwrite. We're working with one homeless shelter right now that has a lumber mill. Most insurance companies are not thrilled with the idea of people working around power equipment, especially if the people who are doing the work may themselves have come from somewhat difficult backgrounds. So by approaching an insurance company with as many missions as possible, it allows us to have the benefit of that clout. Not only do we have the expertise to understand the underwriting that's involved, but we're working with the same underwriter who has worked now with a great many homeless shelters, and he has a much better understanding of what's involved, where the pros and the cons may be for any particular part of a ministry. So when I approached the executive director for the Association of Gospel Rescue Missions, that was pretty much my argument, was that the more expertise we have, the more clout we have, the more missions we have, the better everyone's benefit would be in that capacity. So we put together a presentation. I then went to visit Great American Insurance Company in Chicago, and I explained to them what we were looking to do and what the homeless shelters were all about, and they very much were anxious to do this because they do like working with homeless shelters. So it was just a natural marriage. The question is there any sense of urgency, or can I just get around to looking at my insurance when the time is right? I have yet to meet any mission employees, any staff, who are ever sitting around looking for something to do. There is never a good time. I recognize that most missions are in a higher gear around Thanksgiving and Christmas time, since the bulk of their services and revenue tends to happen around those holidays. But I think that the greater concern is, when is the loss going to happen? When will there be a fire? When will there be a collision or an allegation of a wrongful act? When will those things happen? We never know. We live in a fallen world. We live in a world that is in many ways in disrepair. So that being the case, when will you have a loss? And that's the wrong time to find that you have the wrong insurance program. It's very likely that that fire is only days away from happening. And when it does, it'll probably be at the most inconvenient time possible. That's the wrong time to find out that your insurance policy doesn't have the right coverage. So it's our job to look at every risk that approaches us as an opportunity to correct a problem, to correct a deficiency perhaps. And we find a lot of problems and deficiencies in our competitors' policies. The reality is, a lot of these policies are written by people that have never insured a homeless shelter before. They don't really know exactly how to orchestrate it. And even when they think they do, their insurance company may misclassify it. And most insurance companies will pay the claim, even if it's misclassified, but then they will very promptly cancel the account. We've seen that happen a lot. There was one mission I read about some time back that had a very substantial fire. Soon after the company paid the check for the fire loss, they then canceled the policy. That's not the kind of relationship that you want to find that you have. And you may not even know that you have that kind of relationship until it's really too late. It's much better, in our estimation, to band together with all the various homeless shelters that are part of the association and use our clout, our collective buying clout, in order to come together with the right insurance company, with a broker who understands the risk, and write it together as quickly as we can while we still are this side of a loss. Why should a mission that's located in Spokane, Washington want to do business with a broker who's in Schenectady, New York? Especially considering that the local agent may have been giving money to the mission of late, or perhaps they have served on their board. Why would you want to do business with somebody who's not located right across the street? And the truth of the matter, of course, is I can't be across the street from every client. I can't be in everybody's Rotary Club. I can't be everybody's best friend. However, what we're really talking about here is long-term value. Yes, there will always be patrons who will give large sums of money, or will serve on boards, or will will serve a meal, and that's very important. We don't want to discourage that from ever happening again. What we are looking for is long-term risk management and value that comes from that. So the thing that the Merriam Insurance Agency brings from being in Schenectady, New York, is experience. The 100 years that we've been insuring homeless shelters allows us to have a perspective that helps us to bring the right insurance company, the right underwriter, the right program, and the right price to the ministry, to the mission. It's very possible, of course, that that local broker may be able to put together the right insurance program for that one particular ministry, that one particular mission. But the fact that we work with so many dozens of missions all across the United States has given us a degree of clout and experience that I think has proven itself to have good long-term value. Case in point, if there were to be a mission that had one broker that only wrote one mission, and there were to be a problem, perhaps at the example I cited earlier where there was a very large loss and the insurance company says, we want to get off, that broker then doesn't have any leverage to try and find another insurance company, especially when they go to a new insurance company and that underwriter says, well, what kind of losses have there been in the last 4 years? And when they reveal this very bad fire or a very bad collision or an allegation of abuse or molestation, the underwriter probably is going to run for the hills. So with our experience, we are able to leverage the clout that we have with the number of missions that we serve, and we can then give them continuity. We can get the underwriter to probably insure it anyway. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but value comes about usually from a longer term perspective. It's not just how cheap am I this year, it's what kind of value do I provide long term. And most of the ministries that we work with are in it for the long haul. They're not able to solve society's problems by giving a hot meal and a cot and saying, go in peace. For the most part, we're talking about giving emergency services, and then we're looking at long-term counseling and GED preparation, or working through perhaps some of the abuse issues they had, substance abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. So the missions already recognize it's a long-term investment in their residents. We also look at our clients, the homeless shelters that we service, as being a long-term investment